Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video on Hypixel Skyblock. So Hypixel Skyblock has a lot of weapons, and recently these weapons have gotten really powerful, with things like the Terminator and the Hyperion being in the game. But what if I told you that literally one of the oldest weapons in the game is still really strong up to this day? Well, it's true. And today we're going to be seeing why the Pigman's Sword is actually really overpowered and a great weapon for players starting out dungeons. So without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so here is my Pigman's Sword, and as you can see it's completely maxed out. Now obviously if you're first buying a Pigman's Sword you won't have a maxed out one, but I made a maxed out one so I can compare it to some other common weapons. So let's do it. Alright, so first let's do a quick Overworld Damage test. This is not what this sword is really good at, but you'll still see the results. As you can see, it's going to do 600k, 500k, around 600,000 damage, which is actually kind of insane considering this is the oldest weapon in the entire game. Now let's do an Emerald Blade. I don't have that many purse coins right now, so it's not maxed out, but the Emerald Blade will be doing about 830. And yeah, about a million damage, I'd say. And now I'll use my Fabled Shadow Fury, which is also a really good weapon. And this will be doing, again, similarly about 800k, and sometimes 900k with the Fabled proc. So as you can see right off the bat, the Pigman's Sword is doing about 200,000 less damage than the Shadow Fury, but the Shadow Fury just by itself costs 3 times as much, so already it's kind of decent. However, the Pigman's Sword is not the main star of the show in Overworld Damage. The place where this sword really gets insane is in dungeons, which is why I greatly recommend it to anyone starting out. So let's hop into a dungeon and use this sword as Mage class and as Berserker class, so let's do it. Alright, so first things first, I'm going to use the Pigman's Sword as a Berserker class. So I'm going to be comparing it to my Shadow Fury, and the Shadow Fury is about 4 times more expensive than the Pigman's Sword, so let's see how it does comparatively. So first, the Pigman's Sword will be doing about 36 million damage, which is pretty good, definitely respectable. But now let's use the Pigman's Sword. So as you can see, the Pigman's Sword will be doing 25 million damage. So look at that, the Pigman's Sword, it's a bit inconsistent like the Shadow Fury, but this is doing about 35, this is doing 25 million. So as you can see right off the bat, it's actually pretty comparable to the Shadow Fury, although it's like 4 times cheaper. And it's not even meant for Berserker, and it's still actually doing really good. On top of this, the sword will help you survive, because this ability is actually kind of good. So as you can see, the ability, it's actually really underrated. It now has a 5-second cooldown, making it a lot worse, but it's still usable. As you can see, this thing is going to be doing about like 64,000 damage, just passively, and I'll get a lot of extra defense with it as well, which is always nice. So here's Scarf. As you can see, I'm doing about 2 mil to Scarf and 143k to Blood Mobs. So as you can see, the Pigman's Sword's kind of starting to catch up to the Shadow Fury. And I'll explain why it's doing this in a bit. But as you can see, that's 98. And that's 150k. And this is doing 200k. So as you can see, now the difference to Blood Mobs is actually really small between the Shadow Fury and the Pigman's Sword. Alright, so we'll place down Overflux and... as you can see, the ability is doing pretty good, and I'm just gonna kill all the other Livids on purpose just to show you guys the DPS. As you can see, we're doing about 2 mil to Livid, and the Burning Souls ability is actually helping us quite a bit. As you can see, we got some nice extra defense with all of that, and we're able to go through Livid pretty fast, even though I wasn't even trying to attack the boss itself. Alright, so that was just Berserker, and as you can see, even with Berserker, this is actually really close to such an expensive weapon, the Shadow Fury. But now let's test it with Mage class, which is where it actually gets really strong. Okay, so now we're going to be using the Mage class. And the reason why the Pigman Sword is so good with Mage class is because it has that 300 mana as a base stat, which becomes over 1,000 intelligence in dungeons. So if we go in here, let's do another test between the Pigman Sword and the Shadow Fury. So the Shadow Fury, as you can see, will be doing 50 million damage, about 52 mil. And then this Pigman Sword, as you can see, is gonna be doing just about 40 mil. 45 mil I saw there, but look at how close it is to the Shadow Fury. It's almost the same thing. It's literally like 3 mil damage less than the Shadow Fury. Like, look at this, it's so close. And this weapon is so much cheaper than the Shadow Fury. Look at that. So here it is against a mini boss. Now the mini boss kill times don't really matter because I'm doing floor 5 as a cat of 40, so basically anything is gonna be good. But it is a good metric to see how much damage you'll be doing against mini bosses in Master Mode. So as you can see with this thing, I am doing about 3 million damage to the mini bosses in Master Mode, which is actually really good. Alright, so now we're in the Blood Room, and let's compare these two swords in the Blood Room as well. And just for fun, let's compare the Pigman Sword to my Hyperion while we're at it. Although the enchantments are a bit different, I think it will not mess up the results too much. So here the Hyperion will do 16 mil, kind of sad, and this will do 22 mil. So as you can see, yeah, it's better than a Hyperion. But of course, the Hyperion is not an LCM weapon, so that's not a fair test. But yeah, it does do more LCM damage than a Hyperion, which I find pretty crazy. So anyhow, against Blood Room, as you can see to Bonzo, we're doing 6 million, which is actually really respectable. And to Blood Mobs, we're doing 300k, which is actually really good. As you can see, the Shadow Fury will be doing a bit more, about 360 to Blood Mobs, but still, that's really respectable for the cheap weapon. Alright, so now let's go into the boss and do pretty much the same thing with the Pigman Sword. So as you can see, we're doing 6 mil to Bonzo before there, and that means that in Master Mode 3, you could basically 5-tap Bonzo in Blood Room, which seems really good. So I'll be using the actual strategy for floor 5 this time instead of just taking them all on at once, because it's really annoying to try to figure out which one's which. But as you can see, we are doing 3 million damage to Livid, which is really good. As you can see, 3.6 million to Livid. It won't really get you anywhere in Master Mode 5, but it is really good if you look at these low Catacombs floors. Because we have like no blessings or anything right now, but we're still doing like 3.6 mil. Alright, so based on those tests, as you can see, the Pigman Sword is actually a really strong weapon compared to some other alternatives like the Shadow Fury. It does more LCM damage than Hyperion, and it'll keep you alive in a pinch with its ability. Now on top of this, you might be realizing that I'm using an extremely expensive pet right now. But the good thing about the Pigman Sword is that you don't need an expensive pet. You can actually use a really cheap pet which goes perfectly with this weapon. And that pet is this, the Pigman pet. So you probably have heard about this pet before, but maybe not. But if you did not know, the Pigman pet does buff the Pigman Sword by a lot. As you can see, there's no level 100s right now, but at level 100, it buffs it by 40 damage and 25 strength, if I'm not wrong. And this will be really good with the Pigman Sword because base damage is actually really good after the strength nerfs. So there's also a really nice budget pet that you can use with the Pigman Sword, which will get you the best results possible. So finally, let me explain why the Pigman Sword started getting so good near the end of the run. Basically, the Pigman Sword has so many different stats, unlike the Shadow Fury, with pretty much just damage, strength, and crit damage from a reforge. The Pigman Sword has pretty much every damage-related stat in the game on the sword. It has crit chance, damage, strength, critical damage, intelligence, it has everything. And that means that all of those stats are all amplified by Catacombs bonus. So, as you can see with this sword, I won't really be getting much intelligence or crit damage because it doesn't have that as a base stat. With this, I'm getting significantly more crit damage, and considerably close strength, and of course all that intelligence. So this sword will also continue to get really good as you level up in Catacombs. So that was the video, everyone. I really hope you enjoyed the video about the Pigman sword. I greatly recommend you use this sword if you're a dungeon player starting out. It's very strong and very cheap at that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!